Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Critical Oxygen Podcast, where we help you unlock your physiology and maximize your athletic potential. I'm your host, Phil Batterson, and today we're joined by a brilliant teacher and researcher, and the person who was willing to take me on as his first graduate student when I started my master's degree, Dr. Robbie Jacobs.
Yeah.
Dr. Robbie Jacobs, welcome to the show.
Thanks for happy to be here. It is. Look, it's really great being here. So when I accepted you to be my first graduate student, and I had you in the lab for the first time as we were working on James Pearson's study, and I was getting to know you, and you told me that one of your main goals in life was to be pretty much, I don't know if you said this verbatim, but it was kind of like an influencer. I was like, oh my God.
I'm like,
But
oh no.
then a master's and a PhD later, I mean, you're doing it. And so when an entry-level master's student says that, it's a lot different than when, somebody with their doctorate and years of demonstrating continued perseverance towards excellence in something. It's a different outcome. So I am truly happy to be here, and I really believe in what you're doing. I just hope that my contributions don't pull you down.
No, not at all. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. So one of the reasons why I chose to go study in Dr. Jacobs' lab was because he's really ingrained in the field of exercise performance, but also looking at how our mitochondria actually change at a molecular level in response to exercise. And that really got me intrigued. I have an engineering background. And, from the engineering side of things, I'm always wanting to like optimize machines. That's kind of what engineering does for you. And switching to exercise physiology kind of allowed me to look at how I can optimize the human body as the most complicated machine that's out there. And I remember the first time Dr. Jacobs and I got on the phone, we probably talked for like 2.5 hours or something like that, just about like literally everything we were interested in.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when I knew. I was like, oh, this is going to be fun. I'm going to learn a lot because I didn't have any background, in physiology or anything like that. But I was a little.
You went back and took some community college courses, right? So that you had the necessary requirements to get into a program. But you hit the ground running. And who finished the program as graduate student of the year?
Oh yeah, I guess that was a reward that I got.
I mean, you had some legitimate competition. Like Ethan and those guys, they're no slouches.
Yeah. So it was really fun, to be, really the only graduate student in a lab. We didn't have too much funding or anything like that, but we were able to do some really cool studies, particularly one, that we actually got published that's looking at the predictors of performance. Then we'll talk about that.
I think funding, but did you go to any conferences on funding? And where'd you go?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think so let me just back up for those of you who don't really know my backstory. I got into my master's program, was interested in, potentially becoming like a coach or an exercise physiologist, something along those lines. And, like Robbie was saying, I told him, I was like, well, I kind of want to be, like an influencer, but I don't want to be that kind of influencer, right? I want to be the type that actually gives good information to people and, provides a lot of really good, compelling content, with using research to back up what I'm actually saying. And like he said earlier, it's kind of funny when you're a master's student without, much skin in the game in terms of exercise physiology saying that. And it's a little bit different once you have a PhD. Because now you actually have kind of the notoriety and the tools to be able to actually show and prove to people that you actually have the skills necessary to talk about this sort of stuff. So as I kind of progressed through my master's degree, Robbie and I would always talk about these predictors of performance, and we would dig into what's actually happening at the molecular and cellular level in order to actually allow some people to be much more capable of exercise than others. And I think what you and I both came to the conclusion of, and you came to this conclusion probably, years and years and years before this, is that the mitochondria are truly the number one predictor of performance, for a lot of the endurance population. So that got me really interested in the molecular mechanisms behind exercise adaptation and everything. And that actually, along with the fact that I got to run my own study, I got to go to Australia for a mitochondrial specific conference, out of like the startup money that you had saved. And then on top of that, just all of those good conversations that really, kind of, spur that interest, like that got me, interested in doing my PhD. So, then through connections, with my PhD advisors and Robbie, they went to master's and PhD kind of overlapped together. I was able to go to Oregon
Undergrad
State.
too.
Oh, was it undergrad too?
Yeah, I met Matt Robinson, Dr. Robinson, one of your advisors, when I was an undergrad at Colorado
That's
State.
crazy.
Yeah, we were undergrads together. We were taking tests right next to each other. He was always trying to cheat off of me. Don't tell him I said that.
Yeah, Matt, if you're listening, we know that's not true. But yeah, so with those connections, then I was able to, go to the Translational Metabolism Research Laboratory at Oregon State University, and I really got to, put the pedal to the metal in terms of learning the molecular mechanisms behind how our mitochondria adapt to things like exercise and diet. And that's really what I focused my master or my PhD on, excuse me. And now that I'm done with that, I think there's tremendous value in the molecular side of things, but I want to take a step back and I want to say, okay, how can we use all of this literature and aggregate literature to get the best performance out of whatever body is coming to us? And how do we actually monitor that? How do we test that? How do we apply that to, like just training and recovery in general? So I'm really happy that, this is probably the perfect time to have this podcast up and running again, where I'm going to have experts like Dr. Jacobs, who's going to lead the research side of things, where we're going to talk about all the literature that's coming out, give our kind of 2 cents on things. And then I'll have other co-hosts who I'll be introducing throughout the course of this week and next week that will come on and they'll have different perspectives. So there's one guy who's a professional triathlete, ultra endurance coach, Aaron Gaser, who's going to come on. And we're going to talk more the application of this sort of stuff. How do we navigate the research and then put it into training? Then I have another individual. His name is Andy St. Germain. He was a former CrossFit Games athlete. Now he's a CrossFit coach, works down in Austin, Texas, and is developing some really cool, science-based methods, to get people, to basically optimize physiology for CrossFit. So I'll be talking to him. How is he using that science in a CrossFit, kind of a little bit of a different realm? So the last individual that I'll be bringing on is Jonah Rosner, who is a former strength and conditioning coach for the Houston Texans. And now he lives in New York, where he's doing a lot of physiology testing. And he's particularly doing physiology testing for runners and has experience with a lot of biomechanical sort of stuff. So I'm a little bit more of an expert in the physiology monitoring, metabolic testing, sort of realm. He's definitely an expert in biomechanics. So we're going to merge those, and then we're going to help you as athletes and coaches figure out what the best testing protocols are, how we can use those to, best, again, optimize your physiology to maximize your performance. Because that's the whole point of this podcast, is to help give you perspectives from, pretty much every different angle, and then allow you to, take that information and improve your own physiology and your own performance. So Dr. Jacobs, that's a long-winded way of saying that you're probably one of the reasons why, this whole idea is starting again. And what I'm really interested in, in terms of this introductory podcast, is just to get to know you a little bit better. Why'd you get into exercise physiology? What's the, kind of what was like that fire that kind of started it? to get you going. So we'll start with that, and then we can go from there.
So it may not be as exciting as it seems. I'm either gifted or cursed with the constant desire to learn more, be
Mm-hmm.
better, continual growth. Like mistakes are bring them on. I like mistakes because that offers me opportunities for growth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I probably could have done anything. I probably could be, depending on how the wind blew me on Wall Street right now, as a financial analyst. Like I love a lot of things about life, but I started my undergrad thinking that I was going to become an attorney like my dad. After a semester of classes that just like were not speaking to my soul, uh, I took a science class, and that class really intrigued me as the information that I was learning was immediately applicable to my person. Because just like I said, I try to improve. Like, why? How did I get into studying and describing quote unquote exercise? Is probably because I always wished I was a better athlete.
Mm-hmm.
I was never had the gift of the genes, to get me through onto whatever theater of performance or competition for a given sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned as an undergrad and then much more as a master student that I could become quite um I could become a part of this world, a pretty detailed part of this world. It just looks differently. And
Mm-hmm.
then the more I learned, I mean, I think that people are interested in what they know, right? And so the more I learned, the more interested in these topics I was. And my connection to mitochondria is just serendipitous because my advisors started looking at mitochondria,
Right.
right? And so I that became central in my life really for similar reasons that it did for you because my advisors chose to study it.
Mm-hmm. I
And
think it's I think it's one of those things where people, people like us who are interested in a lot of different things, when we're around somebody who's really excited about something, that
yeah,
gets us excited about it too.
yeah. They can do both, right? Depending on how they decide to translate their excitement, it could like
Mm-hmm.
really pump you up, or it could be like, oh my god, gotta stop talking
So
about
pump the
this.
brakes.
I'm sure that some people are like, oh my gosh, mitochondria barf. But
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And then I got this opportunity to go do my PhD in Switzerland. It wasn't planned. It was also serendipitous, right? Most of this story to this point was never planned. It's the stuff that I didn't anticipate that got me here. And I
Mm-hmm.
was able to work with a well-known researcher, Dr. Karsten Lundby, whose immediate advisor was Bank Saltine, legendary in the field of, exercise, human physiology, integrative
Mm-hmm.
physiology. Um, and Karsten provided me so many opportunities for growth, knowledge, that I was literally the limiting factor. And I just wanted more, 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 more.
Mm-hmm.
And then came back to the States, took a position in academia, and trying to continue, this research into retirement.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one thing that's like really like pretty interesting about a lot of, I think, like, people who go into academia, especially in our field, are generally like okay to pretty good athletes. They just were never like elite of the
Oh,
elite, right? Like I'm a pretty good athlete, like, on paper, but I was never in a position where, like, I was winning conference or winning states or doing anything like that. And it always made me hungry for more. And I always had to kind of take a step back, be like, okay, well, I need to do things a little bit more optimally, because my buddy who's running a 4:10, mile in high school, you know, he's got talent. Like, yeah,
Really? You had somebody in
yes,
your high school that ran a 4:10 mile?
he wasn't in my high school. He's my best friend from high school. And so it was either 410 or 412. And, it's just, it was insane because it was at like our conference track meet, and he beat everybody by probably like 300 or 400 meters. There was literally nobody around him in the mile when he was like finishing, and it was absolutely insane. And then he went on to run at Michigan State. And then of course, once you run at Michigan State, everyone's running at least 410 or 4 flat. And, it's just one of those things where it was like, he had been so good for so long that I think, like coming up against those like barriers, he was just like, I'm okay now. And, then he kind of retired, and, I don't think he runs too much anymore, but yeah, so, so there's differences though. Cause I was always that guy who was like, yeah, I ran like a 4:41 mile in high school, which is good. It's
You
good, but
ran
it's
a
not,
4:41?
yeah,
Oh,
it's good, but it's not
I'm
great.
quitting this podcast.
Well, that was the fastest
That's great.
co-host drop
That's
that we've
great,
ever
Phil.
had.
That's great. I get it. But oh my gosh, that's great. My fastest mile is probably 6:20 something. Like,
But
whew,
and that's also really good, right? Compare like, and
in the grand scale
I
of
always
things.
say, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
So, so I think a lot of us though, we kind of lose that because we're like,
Right.
oh, like I'm not as
For
fast as
sure.
that guy. But then
Right.
we're like, okay, well, how can I optimize my training in order to get there? And then
Right.
when we get into academia, especially since we're passionate about trying to optimize this, we're like, oh, maybe I could take this little piece of research and use it in my training, or maybe I could do this, or maybe I could
Okay.
do this. And
Yeah.
then it's like, oh, well, why hasn't anybody done this before? For example,
Right.
like, there's some studies right now that I'm reading about heat training and hemoglobin mass increases. And we'll talk about this probably at length
I'm
at some point.
listening.
But I'm like, why hasn't anybody, done kind of like altitude training in parallel with heat training to see then who, does better in the heat, who does better in the altitude, and, vice versa, just to see if heat training has the ability to give us or mitigate some of those issues that we get, when we go to altitude, right? So, and then, if I
Interesting.
wasn't in a position to do the research, I'd be like, okay, well, if I have an altitude chamber and an environmental chamber, set it up.
Well, see, and the importance of this podcast is really the communication, right? And this is when I'm teaching exercise physiology. My exercise phys exams are notorious. Like, Phil helped me develop some of these exercise phys tests because he would take them all before I would implement them in class to
And then
make
I get
sure,
yelled at if
right?
I didn't get a perfect
All
score
my
every time.
all my Yeah, right. I would never yell at him. I would just
No.
only make him feel like he didn't know anything. It's so much better. But you can change one word, right? You can change the meaning, the context slightly. Because you
Right.
just said, is altitude or heat training better for exercise at altitude or in the heat? Or neither of those situations, right?
Right.
Do
Right.
either of those provide a advantage to exercise in somewhat of a temperate condition near sea level, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like all those questions matter.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like, that's like the holy grail. If you could figure out,
Right.
an affordable way, to improve performance above, what is seen with traditional training, then people would jump at that, right? And
Right.
that's why, we have this huge following with the altitude training crowd,
Yep.
because they're like,
Exactly.
oh, well, increases in hemoglobin probably going to lead to increases in in performance, even though
there may be all other things happening, but
yep.
And there may be other things happening in different people, right? Like it may not be the same in all people. And so that's why sometimes it's like, it seems that the world of exercise science is a dumpster fire, which it kind of is. And that's why avenues or media such as this podcast are necessary and needed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because, it's understanding what content or what context a research study was done in is super important, right? Who does it apply to?
Super important.
It only applies to probably those 25 elite level male cyclists that you did the test on. So extrapolating could be pretty hard. And we know too, like, one of the biggest differences that hardly ever gets brought up, but is now kind of at the forefront of research a little bit more, are biological differences between males and females. Those are
For
huge,
sure. Yep.
just because of
And
like
how those
development.
differences influence health or performance, right? So not
Exactly.
just are there differences, but are these functional differences? Are these applicable differences?
Yep.
How applicable? How meaningful? You know?
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. A really good example of that is, in like exercise phys books, they show, for a general population, stroke volume increases to about 40%, VO2 max, and then it plateaus. Then what they've done since then is they've followed that up with studies in elite level athletes, males and females, so on and so forth. In elite level athletes, that plateau almost never happens. So those elite level athletes are able to increase their cardiac output until they fail, pretty much.
yeah.
Females, like untrained females, don't have that plateau either. So so now you have all these people who are like,
Now that I
yeah,
didn't know. That's
yeah. So
super
that was something
interesting.
that kind of blew my mind, is that I'm pretty sure
Really?
it was in, like maybe like trained females, but definitely not elite level females.
In untrained females, they also didn't have a plateau in stroke volume.
I'm not 100% sure. I think it was either
If
it.
that's true, give me that. Send me that study. That's
Yeah,
interesting. That
I
is
will.
super interesting.
I will, and we'll discuss it, because,
Okay.
and I know
Okay.
I know exactly why you're asking for that. Um, that's research discussion for another day,
That is
which is really
interesting.
cool, because Dr. Jacobs is actively doing research and analyzing papers and stuff. So we'll be able to drop the cutting edge research from his lab, pretty much before even the journals get it. I don't know if we could before the journals get it, but right when it's about to be
Well,
published.
they'll definitely get my input before the journals get it, but it may
Yeah,
not be delivered as. I'm not probably going to come out and say, like, well, we saw.
right. Right. But it's all things that you're thinking about,
Right.
and
Yep.
that's always the fun stuff to talk about, right?
Right.
Is
And you and I still have some open collaborations, actually,
Mhm.
which is still fun. So even 4 years after you left the lab, I mean, we still have projects up and running that we
Yep.
collaborate on.
Yep.
It's
Yeah,
fun.
exactly. So we're, like that this is my way of, being able to keep my foot in, kind of like the research area, the door. Um I'm not
Well,
going
to
to
keep
actively
sharp,
be.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
no,
gotta
exactly.
keep that edge sharp.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think, like, reading and discussing articles is going to be, super nice. So I think, the way that Dr. Jacobs and I are going to go about, doing this side of the podcast is we want to start with, just choosing topics. So if you have any topic suggestions or anything like that, you know where to find me on Instagram, Critical Oxygen or Critical O2. Um, and, so shoot me a DM. What sort of, information do you want to hear out of us? If you have papers you want us to discuss, those sort of things, let us know.
Talk
But
about lactic acid at
yeah,
all? We could
we'll
talk
we'll
about some
bust
lactic acid.
we'll bust some myths at some point as well. And but really, what we're gonna try to do, is we're gonna try to look at like a review article, and then we'll try to dig into some of the primary literature and help people become a little bit more uh, literature literate, as it were. Um, and I think that'll help people as well. Like get kind of scratch that itch to, how would we as researchers really go through and analyze a paper, a study. I'm certainly one of those people that, for the most part, if something's published in a reputable journal, there's something we can gain out of it. You can't just throw it out because you disagree with it or whatever it is. There's always something that you can find, that could be useful for you. So we'll get at that. We'll talk about pros and cons, different ways you could go about, studying this. Who is it applicable for? All of that, because I think, now that I'm thinking about it a little bit more, I think that this area of the podcast could be very useful for people to be able to get more of that scientific literacy. How to read papers. Like, if we have a mouse study, how applicable is that to human studies? What can we actually take from that? Uh, and I think it'll give people a really good idea of like, how we think, and, hopefully help them think a little bit uh, more pointedly, when if they ever read, one of one of these peer reviewed uh, pieces of literature. If not, you'll probably be seeing studies that get published. Like, for example, the New York Times published a paper a little while ago. Well, they published an article. It was not a paper. They published an article that basically stated, is too much high intensity exercise damaging your
Oh, I'm
mitochondria?
gonna vomit. I'm gonna vomit all over my microphone. I'm feeling nauseous already. Oh my god! Did you know? Do you know? I must have talked to you about this, right?
I think so, at the conference.
Oh yeah, I couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe it. Keep going. I
Yeah.
interrupted. I apologize. I
No.
want to hear this.
No, 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 no. So the point is, though, is that you can't believe everything that even the New York Times, publishes as an article, because
They want
from my
clicks.
understanding,
They
what?
want clicks. They want
Yeah,
viewership. Like
yeah,
this is
exactly.
a sexy title. Like too much exercise is bad for you, which is true.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
absolutely true.
yeah. But
Right?
do you want to know how much exercise these individuals had to do in order to actually make it
Yeah,
bad for them? They had
and
to do a
yeah,
VO2 max workout 5 days a week, in the morning and at night. So they did 10 VO2 max workouts in like 1 week or something like that, which
and
is
it's questionable how much it was to their detriment. Like I could provide some rationale as it wasn't even that detrimental. You know,
right, right. So, but then what these authors did is they measured mitochondrial function during, you know,
allegedly.
during this during this intervention, and they found that mitochondrial function, went down. But we know, I mean, like, just to kind of go back to what you were talking about, is like, you have to put in a little bit of damage and then recover in order to get super compensation. And what happened after they gave a rest week for these individuals, their mitochondrial function came right back to normal. But because of the way that the paper was written, and the way that the New York Times article took that data, a lot of people were like, oh my, like, it was essentially written as, be careful with with high intensity interval training, because high intensity interval training is this big new trend, and he's like, don't do it. And I totally disagree with the public health, sentiment that they were having there. We don't have an issue of people working out too much in the United States. We have an issue of people not working out enough.
Totally.
And by publishing stuff like that, you're just giving people more fodder to not
Yeah.
exercise,
Right.
which is sad.
Yeah. And it's the quote unquote news just giving skewed view on something that most people probably want to hear, right? Oh, I better
Right.
not.
Yeah.
I've already done my enough exercise for the day. I don't want to die.
Right. Yeah. I don't want to damage my mitochondria too much.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and
Well, it's
well, I
ridiculous.
think too, that's another thing that just came to my mind. We can talk about, kind of like time course of adaptations, and, like those 7 physiological perturbations that actually result in adaptation. But the first thing that needs to happen is you need to cause enough stress for damage to occur, and then you need to rest enough for your physiology to come back better and protect against disturbances and homeostasis better than where it was.
Yeah.
So
Everything that improves our biology is a threat to our life. Like if
yeah.
we get anything at too much exposure, it would be a loss of life. But in delivered in, small, let's think of it as microdosing. In small quantities, it's beneficial, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's definitely nuance to it. And then the just the range in biological variability. We were just talking about the absurdities between the fastest, most capable athletes versus the average versus like the worst. Like that is a big stretch, and sometimes it's hard to understand. I think I'm glad that I'm not actually super fit, because you have a lot better athletic prowess than even I do, but I see some of these researchers that are like close to pro, but
Mm-hmm.
not quite there. I think that would be the hardest.
Yeah, it's
That
kind
they're
of like,
just right there.
yeah, it's kind of like the most disappointing um place to get in the Olympics is the silver medal,
Right.
because you're like, I was so close to actually
Right.
being the best in the world,
Yeah.
And that's actually like, I think like there's been studies that have done that. Like they ask like the silver medalists and they're like, no, I have no pride in this silver medal and stuff. Cause I was the first loser essentially.
It's
Whereas
wild.
the bronze medalist has a much better outcome because they're like, oh
Right.
yeah, I wasn't going to win anyways, but I still
Medaled.
got top 3.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's all perspective.
yeah, it is really interesting how, I mean, in psychology is a whole different realm, right? And I don't really, dabble in that too much. Maybe I'll be able to get a sports psychologist on at some point to be able to talk to them about, how is psychology really affecting our physiology? Because it certainly does. And there are people, myself included, who are, kind of those like super type A individuals, high stress all the time. And some days it just wrecks me. Whereas
Most
like there's
days it
other
wrecks
people.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most days. Totally. Because my sleep is usually crap.
Hmm.
I struggle with sleep all the time. Job is primarily sedentary. It's
Right.
really hard to do a lot of aspects of this job while being active. And so then like yesterday, I feel so bad for my dog. She wants to hang out. It was a little bit longer day of work than I saw. I was going to get on the bike for an hour and a half and I just couldn't do it. So what do I do instead? I tried a double time for 45 minutes. That's why when you text me, maybe I was a little bit grumpy. Because it's just trying to put out more than I'm capable of just to
Right.
try to fit it all in
Right.
one day, right?
I know. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is now that I'm going to be, recording podcasts more and be sitting, at my desk a lot more. I'm like, man, maybe I just need to get an under desk walking treadmill so that even during the podcast, I can at least be walking. Right. Um,
There's a
and
little bit of activity that improves cognition, but for me
right.
personally, I find that it's pretty quick. The activity that I need to be engaged with isn't that difficult before my cognitive decline is set in, because
Right.
sometimes we're talking about such complex things that require balancing so many thoughts, right?
Hmm.
That becomes difficult. I'd be impressed if you master the desk treadmill while
Well,
maintaining good conversation.
yeah, I think that is going to be a challenge. I think, I remember back to when I was taking those classes at the community college. I would go down in, I was living with my parents at the time. I'd go down in their basement. They had a treadmill and I had used like clamps with like a 2x8 and I like clamped them onto like the rails and I would walk for 2 hours while I read my book.
Really? That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And it seemed to work pretty well.
Yeah. I read
Um,
articles while doing the Stairmaster many a time.
yeah. So, and it, like, I think a lot of people get a little confused about, because there's research articles that are like, oh, well, or not research articles. There's researchers out there saying if you're not exercising right at that like fat max zone 2 mark, then you're not going to be getting all of these benefits, to your mitochondria and to your capillary density and stuff like that. I would argue it's all a continuum. Doing nothing or doing something is better than doing nothing. And doing that something, even if it's like a really slow walk, is still going to get you 80 to 90% of those adaptations that are actually happening. So, if you're able to maintain your cognitive function while you're doing that, that's even better, right? Because then I can do exercise, so I'm benefiting my body, and I can record a podcast at the same time. Like that seems like a win-win to me. Whereas if I'm actually doing like zone 2 work, like it does take a little bit of concentration
Right.
and you have to
Right.
get, like it's hard to maintain kind of like those really complicated trains of thought and really, put those ideas together.
Does critical oxygen or critical O2 have a positional stance on the definitive zone 2?
Absolutely not. I think and we'll talk about this. I think from my perspective, like you go, if you were to do everything kind of in like this optimal way, right? You go into a research lab, have your gas being analyzed, your CO2 and your oxygen, and then from that, you get an RER curve essentially. From that RER curve, you can actually determine what your fat max is. But the problem with that is that you're only determining it for the physiology that you have on that given day. you're probably, either going to be fasted or you haven't eaten for 2 to 3 hours. So it's, potentially different than what you would actually be doing, right? A lot of the times, I'll go out and I'll like work out and I'll be like drinking something the entire time. We know that just having more carbohydrate within your blood is going to preferentially oxidize that carbohydrate. So that's going to shut down your fat max anyways. And so there's all of these variables and all of these things that are going to shift how much fat you're oxidizing, how much carbohydrate you're oxidizing. But I think at the end of the day, at least testing it is going to give you a better estimate than just taking, one of those random, heart rate zone sort of things where it's like, oh, if you,
Totally.
220 minus your age, which is BS to start with, or
Right.
even if you figured out your max heart rate and then doing like, oh, well, 90% is this zone, 90 or 80% is this zone, and then 70, 60, 50. And again, that's like the whole point is, and, too, everyone thinks that fat max, or not everyone, but a lot of people think that fat max is the point where you're only oxidizing fat. That's also not true. So, right now I'm actually probably have a very much higher percentage of fat oxidation compared to carbohydrate oxidation than if I was at fat max. But fat max is the maximal capacity for fat oxidation that your body has. So that's a long-winded way of me getting fired up and just saying it's good to estimate it, but then it's also good to have some way of estimating it on a day-to-day basis. And at the end of the day, again, if you're not exercising at 1.8 millimole of lactate or something like that, you're still, if you're going low enough, you're still going to be oxidizing a large percentage of fats. And it's time under tension, right? Time under lowish oxygen tension that's going to get you those adaptations, increase fat oxidation enzymes, increase mitochondrial volume density, so on and so forth. That's really going to help. Like,
So
what do you think about that? Like,
do you define zone 2 as exercise at or below 2 millimoles of blood lactate?
no, I don't use lactate at all.
Well, how do you define zone 2?
Fat max would be,
Oh, so what
yeah.
is how wide, like, then what is the range at which somebody stays in fat max or stays in
Oh,
zone 2 if it's fat
yeah.
max,
I
right?
think, yeah, that's
That's
a really
cool.
good
Who
question.
else? Who else? I've never actually heard it described as fat max in zone 2. Who is that? Just kind of your take?
No,
Who who
I
describes it as
think,
it? That's the problem with zone 2, right? Last
yeah.
night, Phil asked me how I determined my zone 2 exercise. I said, let's start recording because shenanigans are going to ensue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if I
Yeah.
put, like, in a paper, I had them train in zone 2, reviews would be like, what the fuck do you mean by that?
Right. No, exactly. So, and also it depends if you're using a 5-zone model or a 3-zone model. So,
Right. Right.
there's
Totally.
another researcher, Seiler, who has come out with, he's
Yeah.
one of the guys that's done a ton
Dr.
of like
Steven Seidler.
yeah, he's done a ton of like the quantification of different training zones, but
Yeah.
he only does it on a 3-zone model. So when
Yep.
he quantifies zone 2, he's really quantifying like threshold training.
Yeah.
Whereas
And
for him, it'd be
he,
zone 1.
and he really pushes the 80-20 phenomenon
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
80% of a workout, your workout, all your workouts should be lowish,
Yeah, so
moderate
zone
intensity.
1 in a 3-zone model or zone 2 in a 5-zone model, right?
Right.
So it's super confusing, but I would say, okay, so this is how I would do it. First of all, I would change the vernacular behind all this. Get rid of zones
Yeah. Yeah.
and change it to physiological intensity domains. You
Totally.
have your moderate, your heavy, and your severe.
Yeah.
The delineation between your moderate and your heavy is your first threshold. So whatever threshold you're measuring, it doesn't matter at the end of
I
the
would
day.
say that there's 4. There's also low, right?
Yeah,
Because gas
but
exchange threshold kind of sets in that at the beginning to the
so
moderate.
so I would say this is where it's kind of it's not like like
Right.
a
Right.
strict cutoff. It's
Right.
a zone, right? Or it's
Yeah.
like it's a transitionary zone.
Yeah.
And this is where it's like it gets more complicated, but I think it's a better way to think about it. So you have your moderate, your heavy, and your severe.
Yeah.
And so your threshold 1, whatever you want to deem that as,
Right.
would be
First
considered that.
lactate threshold, first ventilatory threshold. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm with you.
exactly. Like 2 millimole lactate, first rise in lactate, the 80 million different things that you
Gas
can actually
exchange
quantify.
threshold. Yeah, exactly.
Um,
I'm with you.
so Near's breakpoint, right? That's another big one.
Is that
So
the first? Is that the first? Or that's more associated later, right?
no, those are all threshold 1.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Near's
Okay.
breakpoint 1 would all be in that
How many
threshold
nearest
1.
breakpoints are there?
2.
Oh, so there is
Yeah.
one at like LTVT1 and one at
Mm-hmm.
LTVT2.
Yep. Yeah. And then so I would say so that would be your delineation, your moderate to your heavy domain. Fat
Totally.
max is also in there as well. Then your delineation between your heavy and severe domain is because essentially what we're trying to detect are changes in your physiology. So second change in physiology to unsustainable pace is going to be your maximal lactate steady state, your critical power, your VT2, your LT2, 4 millimole LT. And I laugh because I just think making an arbitrary number for, a threshold is kind of silly, but it gets you most of the way there. I digress. Near's breakpoint too. All of those different things are all the delineation points. And then within that, you actually kind of have a cascade of when those thresholds are occurring. So like you were saying, what'd you say, respiratory compensation points actually probably at that low-ish end.
Gas exchange threshold. Respiratory
Or gas exchange
compensation
threshold.
point is more with LT2, and it would
Okay.
be the second deoxygenation breakpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, so within all of those thresholds, you have one that's occurring, maybe in the middle of your moderate intensity, maybe one that's at the very edge of it. So it's, again, it's
There's
like,
data that's going to be published with your name on it that may explain it a bit differently.
yeah. So, and that's okay. And I'll read it
Can
and
I give
maybe,
you my interpretation of critical power? So I think there are
yeah.
three. I think there are three legitimate thresholds:
Okay. Yeah. I want to hear
VO2
this.
max, critical power, and fat max. I think those are
Okay.
the three only legitimate thresholds. Because when somebody is fully rested, fully, like, no nutritional deficits, when somebody is engaged, when they are active at that critical power for an extended period of time, and they're measuring gas exchange, what's VO2? What's the rate of VO2 equivalent at? VO2
Well, isn't it?
max.
Yeah.
Because
Cause it
remember
go,
that Poole and Jones paper even suggested during your masters, we were considering running a critical power test
mm-hmm.
as the validation for the VO2, right?
Right. Right.
But
Yeah. So,
obviously, as people become, as they start to lose glycogen stores and rely more on fat oxidation when they have suboptimal substrate availability,
mm-hmm.
critical power starts to drop, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so let's say you went out and you ran at critical power indefinitely. The only thing you were taking in is water. Your speed would continue to drop, continue to drop, continue to drop until when? Fat max.
Right.
Until you're primarily using burning fat. So I really think that the two true biological thresholds are VO2 max and fat max. And I think critical power is the level at which you're able to sustain exercise between them. It ranges from VO2 max to fat max.
Yeah.
And these
Yeah.
lactate 1, ventilatory 1, lactate 2, ventilatory 3, they're static. They're static
Well, no, so,
thresholds, meaning
but
that
this
if
is,
independent of fitness, they occur kind of at the same percent of somebody's max.
so percentage of somebody's max,
Right.
but those would
They
change on a
change
daily basis, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. Like the
They
power output,
absolutely
right?
can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so
Yeah.
those are great. I think those thresholds are great to try to plan workouts around, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you can use these to largely distinguish what you just explained: low from moderate, moderate from heavy, heavy from severe exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, when you're planning, when you're programming exercise, for endurance, you keep those. I mean, those are variables that you manipulate to maximize adaptation, right?
Right.
And so even though I didn't reference those like as true thresholds, I think there's value in knowing them and using them, right?
Yeah.
When you're trying to figure out your
Yeah.
training.
Well, I think people spend too much time arguing about whether or not they're actually
Exactly.
true thresholds and stuff, rather than just saying
Exactly.
what
Exactly.
can we use them for, right?
Yep.
And this is exactly what we're, like there's the response and rebuttal paper that went back and forth. Is like, oh, are these thresholds actually occurring at the same physiological intensity? Is like, most likely no, because if you're measuring oxygenation at the muscle, that's going to be a lot different than the time it takes for lactate to accumulate in the blood.
Yeah, it's time
Or
course. And so we
yeah,
have a poor ability to distinguish, yeah, exactly, the different time courses for these.
yeah,
Because one's being measured by expired gas, one's being measured by arterialized, in quotation, blood. I mean,
right,
what, are we getting venous? Are we getting arterial? Are we getting mixed? What are we doing
yeah,
here? Or, like, that's one benefit with NIRS, right? It's instantaneous analysis of exactly what you need. I mean, that's a benefit of heart rate too, right? We're able to
hmm,
look at changes in heart rate instantaneously, and these biometrics are valuable because of that instantaneous feedback.
yeah. No, I 100% agree. I think I've been really leaning towards, the physiological training plan, for people on critical oxygen.
Really
And that's like, yeah,
cool.
and
How'd
I
you
don't
do
know
it?
if so it would be kind of like this, right? You go in, you get your maximal exercise test, you do
Yeah,
your efficiencies, your threshold determinations, really whatever devices you have available to you. And then from there, you get your heart rate at those thresholds. Then what you do is you train mostly to those heart rates rather than training to a power output or a speed, because you and I both know one day you could be riding at 200 watts and it would be so easy. And then the next day you come back because you just like, you probably went too hard, didn't refuel, other things like that. And it feels like your legs are in cement, but
totally.
your heart rate kind of reflects that, right? Your heart rate would be a lot higher because the physiological demand of that task is higher. But I get a lot of pushback from that, just because people, like, especially in the cycling space, like, people are like, oh, power all day. And I'm like, well, power tells you nothing about what's actually happening internally whatsoever. So how can you tell me that you're getting the adequate physiological stimulus for any given workout when you're not even using a metric that's measuring that? So
And you
I,
know what?
this is,
The best approach probably lies somewhere in between, because some days you
and it
should
does.
really listen to your
Hmm.
body, and on some days you should probably learn how to push past
Yeah. No,
those heavy legs, right?
I 100% agree with that. I think, like, especially for like your interval workouts and stuff. Heart rate's good, but it's not responsive quickly enough, to be
Right,
able to be like,
right.
oh, well,
There are
I'm going
high
to go out and
intensity
I'm going to do
intervals.
my VO2 max workout
Yeah,
at,
right,
165 beats per minute. It's
right,
like, no, you need to just go hard for 4 minutes. Like,
right, right.
and then recover for 4 minutes and then do it again. No, so I think there's certainly, times where it's useful to use
Totally.
heart rate, and then it's useful to use like the power and
And
stuff.
that's
And I
what
think
critical oxygen is going to teach everybody.
that's one of the goals is,
Give them the
you
power.
know,
Teach how to use this information, and then
hmm,
you've got the power.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think, that's kind of where we want the podcast to go and everything.
I'm
We're
pumped. Sounds
Yeah,
great.
I'm very excited to start this up again. Like for those of you who don't know, I'd probably like 40, 50 episodes of a different podcast recorded. But just because things got busy with my PhD and other things like that, we had to kind of pump the brakes, and we haven't been able to get the ball rolling again. So this is my way of, kind of getting the ball rolling again and supporting the critical oxygen community, specifically with Instagram, right? And, being able to give you guys more information and more educational content, because there's people who ask me about it all the time. And, now is the best time, better time than ever to start this up and continue it going. And I think I have a really good group of individuals who are going to continually be on the podcast, Robbie included, and we're really excited. So
And
for
hopefully
those
we'll
of
be able to
you,
bring on even more outside, right?
oh, for
Get
sure,
more and
yeah,
more and more expert
yep.
opinion and thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I plan on getting the research guests, the coaching guests, the elite level athlete guests, like all of that, onto the podcast, because again, the whole goal is to help you gain as many perspectives as possible that then might resonate with you, so then you can change and adapt your training, accordingly, and get the most out of it. Because at the end of the day, it's like that's really what I want to help people do, is teach people a little bit, but then allow them to make their own decisions and become kind of independent investigators and researchers, based on all of this information that you're getting. So yeah, we're super excited. And if you guys have any questions or comments, shoot me a DM, respond to my posts on Critical O2 on Instagram. I'll start posting these these videos on YouTube. So leave a comment down below if you're on YouTube listening to this, if you have, if you need any clarifications or anything like that. If you want to hear any specific topics or have any guest suggestions, let us know and we'll bring them on. Yeah, Dr. Jacobs, do you have any, you have social media stuff you want to plug?
I want to see how this goes before I plug my social media. You can find me. You can find me very
You can find
easily
them
out there.
All right. So
I'm a little bit more scared of the social media aspect. I am
yeah,
100% on board with getting this information out so people have the knowledge to make their own decisions, right?
yeah,
I'm a little
yeah.
terrified
You can
about.
direct all your comments and
Yeah,
questions
exactly.
towards Dr. Jacobs at me first, and I'll relay
Yeah.
them to him on the
Yeah.
podcast, and we'll get a
Perfect.
chuckle out of it. All right, everybody. We hoping you enjoyed this first episode, and we look forward to kind of helping this knowledge base expand a little bit more. All right, peace.